wound up, though, Nick, playing that three big lineup that you're talking about, wound up playing it for 8 minutes and 31 seconds, according to live stats. And I say this to say, live stats can be a little wonky sometimes, in terms of the exact timing, but basically 8.5 minutes played with KJ Adams at the 3, Flory Badunga at the 4, and Hunter Dickinson at the 5. I'm not sure that's something that any of us saw happening.
Thanks for listening to KC Sports Network, proudly presented by Emprise Bank. If you're thinking about starting a business or know someone who is, check out Emprise Bank's SBA loans. It's always good to know your options, and they can be your partner in possible. Pay heed, all who enter, and beware this podcast. That's right, this is the Paid Podcast on the Kansas City Sports Network. I'm Nick Springer. I'm here with Kevin Flaherty. We're brought to you by Emprise Bank, your partner in all things possible. Member FDIC. And today, my goal is to make this show as chaotic and hectic as KU's basketball game was last night against UCF. That is the plan. We're going to try to do just full mayhem, full chaos for the show to replicate what we watched against UCF at Allen Fieldhouse. So we're going to be breaking that all down and much more here on the show today. Of course, if you like what you're watching or if you're listening on audio, you can subscribe. Apple, Spotify, leave us a 5-star rating and review. If you're joining us on YouTube, be sure to subscribe. We are over 500 subscribers now, so thanks so much to everybody that has already subscribed to us. Tell your friends, tell your family, tell anybody else. Get them over here. Tell them to subscribe. Tell them to drop a comment to share their thoughts as well. Thanks so much to everybody that was on our live show after the KU Houston game over the weekend as well. So big thanks to everybody that continues to support and share their thoughts and join on the conversation with us on YouTube, on our social media platforms, or anywhere else you may enjoy the show. So thank you again. Before we get too deep into the weeds on KU basketball, did want to offer a little bit of an update on the happenings of Kansas football. And you're thinking, it's January 29th. How could there be that much happening with Kansas football? Well, there is. Kansas is making a major headway in the class of 2026. So we're talking about players that are juniors that will be going to the senior seasons in the fall of 25 and then joining Kansas in 2026. So class of 2026 players. Kansas is making major headway, especially in the state of Kansas. And that's been certainly a big deal. I know, Kevin, you've been tracking it very closely. Kansas, literally over the past, basically since Saturday, has recorded about, 6 commits since Saturday, a couple of big names. They landed Caden Snyder from Salina, who is actually their highest rated player in the class, a 4-star, to go along with Hunter Higgins, JJ Dunnigan. They get Josh Galbraith, a local kid from Lawrence, Corbin Glasgow, who is from Denton, Texas, Jack Oots from Platte City, Missouri, Malachi Mills from Indiana, and Landon Anderson from Oklahoma. So, Kevin, we don't need to dive too deeply into each guy individually, but just kind of overall, what do you make of this sudden surge in commitments to Kansas here this past couple days?
Well, yeah, Kansas had junior days and obviously did very well with them when you look at what happened. And I think this is one of those things that you can see happen in recruiting, because especially now there's so limited spots that it's kind of like, once you get that ball rolling, you get 2 or 3 guys, and it's kind of like, well, I'm a wide receiver. I know they don't have too many wide receiver spots left. I kind of want to get my spot. And so you can really build momentum that way. And I think Kansas has quite a bit of momentum for a few different reasons, getting ready to open all the new facilities, including the new stadium. And I think too, Nick, this is a class that obviously you're with me on verbal commitment. Ryan and I have been talking over there about how Kansas has been trending really well in state with this 2026 class for the last 6 months or a year. They've been building those relationships a really long time. They've made headway in the state, and Kansas has really presented itself as sort of a viable option for a lot of those in-state guys. Whereas before it was kind of like, well, if I'm going to stay in state, I have a pretty good idea where I should go. Now there's actually a choice, and Kansas is doing a good job of then recruiting on more equal footing and making the most of sort of having that head start from where they were before. Also, Nick, I know we just talked a lot about the in-state guys. One of my favorite guys in this class, and I consider JJ Dunnigan to be the top guy in state in this class. I'm not sure the recruiting sites have caught up to that one just yet. Landon Anderson, maybe, my second favorite guy in this class. doesn't have a rating yet, but you watch his stuff, and he's, it's kind of funny. Was talking to a friend of the show, Michael Swain over at Fawn.net, and he sees him as almost like a turbocharged Blake Harrell, which you think about Blake Harrell being kind of one of the ascendant young stars of this Kansas program, been called the best interior pass rusher on the team, playing really early, has really set himself up to be a guy that's going to be a foundational piece for Kansas for the next few years, to get basically a version of Blake Harrell. And, oh, by the way, he also may be more athletic. That's not a bad advertisement for a guy. So certainly a great start and a really nice run. And by the way, Nick, for those who might be wondering, just real quick, Kansas may take 20 guys in this class. So they're at 11. They're, more than halfway done probably in terms of high school guys. And obviously that can change or whatever. It can slide back a little bit if they decide, hey, we should be closer to 17, 18 because we want to take a couple more transfers. Or if they just say, hey, there's a couple really good high school guys on our board that we really like. Let's go a couple fewer transfers and maybe take those guys. But right now, I think they're tracking for about 20, and so getting 11, it's not even February yet. It is a really strong start.
Couple of quick notes. You mentioned 11 commitments. That also ranks them 11th in the country in the class of 2026, which is pretty cool. You mentioned the in-state Kansas. KU has 24/7 Sports has 11 players ranked in the state of Kansas for 2026. Kansas has 6 of them committed at the moment, which is also very significant. You mentioned Landon Anderson from Oklahoma, who's very exciting. One other thing, Malachi Mills, the offensive tackle from Indiana, attends the same high school that Cole Ballard attended. And I think had that relationship maybe helped a little bit with getting him as well, a big offensive tackle commitment. So
you've seen Josh Galbraith too.
Yes. Yeah.
What are your thoughts on Josh?
Yeah, Josh Galbraith is incredibly athletic. He's a very, very explosive player. He's another guy that I think, depending on how he grows, could also be somebody you could make an argument as more of a Hawk type role for him.
Yeah,
because he's very athletic, very explosive, and can really move very well. I think I mentioned on a previous show, he plays basketball for Lawrence as well, but he's been dealing with an injury, so we haven't got to see him on the basketball court yet. But when he does, you can see him playing at or above the rim that really fully showcases the type of athleticism that he has. So he's a guy that certainly you can be excited about from an athletic standpoint. You mentioned JJ Lincoln. Caden Snyder is somebody that, if he grows, could be really significant to go along with some of the other guys.
Pointers in a basketball game last year. So
Snyder did.
So you love your offensive tackles to have that level of skill to be out there picking and popping and draining threes all over the place. But your point on Galbraith, I really think this is an athletic class, Nick.
Just overall.
Yeah, I think you have a lot of guys that move really well. Nate Sims, another in-state guy that, was the fastest sophomore in the state this past year. I'm really interested to see what his track times look like as a junior. We had his interview up, and he said he wanted to go 10.4, which, at that point, you're approaching the fastest times, ever put up in the state of Kansas from a high school kid. And by the way, if you think 10.4 is fast, you're probably going to like Corbin Glasgow, who has already run 10.33 when he was a high school sophomore. Probably going to be one of the fastest guys at the University of Kansas, including the track team, once he shows up. But those are the kinds of guys that Kansas has for a guy like Jalen Mason, the quarterback from Wichita Northwest, to distribute the ball to.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the thing I will say though is, look, in this era of college recruiting, commitments don't always mean that they're 100% going to get to campus. So, from KU's perspective, it'll become about, continuing to go out and recruit guys that they want to add to their board, but also about retaining the players they have. JJ Dunnigan, for example, is a guy that got an offer from Ole Miss just a couple days ago. So the recruiting process, as you know, Kevin, does not stop once the player commits. It doesn't stop until they've signed on the dotted line. So keep that in mind as well as KU continues to try to build their class and retain the guys that they already have committed as well. Okay, let's shift gears to KU basketball and what transpired last night. If you're listening on Tuesday or if you're listening on Wednesday, on Tuesday night. KU and UCF. First off, pregame, some weird shenanigans occur where KJ Adams is warming up. Bill Self says he's going to be limited, and another player is not warming up. It'd be one Dajuan Harris, and it turns out Dajuan Harris had tweaked his ankle in practice, was going to be unavailable for the game against UCF. So already down KJ Adams and not expecting KJ Adams to play a big role, you lose Dajuan Harris as well. And that forced Bill Self into, shall we say, some bizarre lineup combinations that produced some equally bizarre results at times in the game for Kansas. To start, though, man, I got to tell you, Zeke Mayo at Allen Fieldhouse in the first 4 minutes, he is unbelievable. It's now been kind of becoming a trend for him where he just comes out with his hair on fire at home. And he did it again for KU. Kevin, this first 4 minutes was just absolutely bananas. It was, by the way, with like 16 minutes left in the first half at the under 16 timeout, it was 19-16 between KU and UCF. What did you make of the start of the game? We'll get obviously more into what kind of happened over the course of the game, but just the start of it, knowing that Dajuan Harris is going to be out for the game, did that shift your expectations and maybe how things played out early in the game for KU?
Well, and apparently Bill Self didn't like it because he never played his starting lineup again the rest of the game. Like the first subs came at 13:28, and after that point, I mean, there were lineups where he had 4 of the 5 starters out there, but never again did he have those 5 guys all out on the court together, and that just kind of tells you the sort of night it was, where he was kind of, you hate to say throwing stuff against a wall, but he really was tinkering a lot to try and find what works. And I'm not sure, Nick, that there are a whole lot of combinations that you could just look at and say that worked super well. And so it was kind of like steal 3 minutes here, steal 2 minutes there, do this combination here, do this combination there. And to your point, Kansas winds up putting up, I think, 1.2 points per possession, pretty much right on the nose. But you take away those first 4 minutes where Zeke Mayo was basically the NBA Jam. He's on fire, throwing a flaming basketball into the hoop. And I think the offensive picture looks quite a bit different.
Yeah, it was one of those weird things where one lineup you would say, hey, they got a couple stops in a row, but they can't score. And then you have another lineup where, oh, okay, the offense is looking pretty smooth, some nice passing, but they're cones on defense. So it was just a mishmash of chaotic and listen, credit to UCF. They came out and played, I think, obviously significantly better than what we saw from them in Orlando, right? This is the same team that KU beat by 51 in Orlando. And it's kind of crazy to think about, hey, look, you beat UCF by a combined 55 points between your 2 games against them. And it was 51 of them was in the game on the road. You only won by 4 at home. 91-87. So, yeah, absolute insanity. We've talked about it before, Kevin. I think this game kind of symbolized what we've mentioned earlier, which is, look, this Kansas team can win games like this, 91-87, but they can also win games, 60-50 or 65-50, right? And you almost have to wonder if Bill Self doesn't want them to win more of the games that are 65-50 versus games like this, because the lineups were interesting. I think the biggest one to me that I kind of want to touch on here is going to a lineup with KJ plus Flory plus Hunter was very intriguing. And I think at times with Bill Self, it's, you fall into this trap of trying to sort of decipher what he's trying to do with certain things, right? Like you see him make a move and you're like, what's he cooking there? What's the underlying thought process here? I gotta be honest, I can't think of any underlying thought process to that lineup, but he went through it a couple times and it worked a little bit, I guess, but yeah, it was certainly a topsy-turvy game from start to finish.
Yeah, to your point, the first time he did it, he actually had Storr at the 2 as well. So, I mean, just an absolutely monstrous lineup. Point guard, by the way, was also Zeke Mayo. So, I mean, they were big with that lineup. And I thought at the time he's just stealing a couple minutes here, And the other thing is I think, KJ can defend threes. And so you're looking at it. Bill Self was probably, at the time trying to, hey, let's see if we can slow things down, kind of get the UCF offense, off track a little bit. Wound up, though, Nick, playing that three big lineup that you're talking about, wound up playing it for 8 minutes and 31 seconds, according to live stats. And I say this to say, live stats can be a little wonky sometimes, in terms of the exact timing, but basically 8.5 minutes played with KJ Adams at the 3, Flory Badunga at the 4, and Hunter Dickinson at the 5. I'm not sure that's something that any of us saw happening. By the way, that group wound up being a 0 from a plus minus standpoint. If you were curious, they were actually 2 points down heading into the final 2 seconds, and then Self put out all three of those guys for the inbounds. Which is funny because obviously against Houston, Kansas kind of struggled to inbound the ball, and so he had Flory and KJ out on the court to give them a little bit of size. Hunter Dickinson was inbounding the ball rather than Zeke Mayo, who struggled with it. You wind up getting a foul. You get 2 free throws. They get the 2 points to make the plus minus 0. But it is interesting, Nick, that it wasn't just something where it was like, hey, I'm going to steal a couple minutes here. It was something that actually became a pretty decent chunk of the game. I mean, you're playing almost a fourth of the game there with those 3 guys on the court together.
Yeah, and Rylan Griffin still ended up playing a decent amount. I know, at times it was like, okay, well, look, if you're going to go with those 2 bigs, why wouldn't you have Rylan Griffin be your 3? But he did. It just didn't happen. And then obviously didn't see Shaq Moore very much at the end of in the second half either as well. So I kind of want to touch more on Dajuan Harris, and I think certainly we have to talk about KJ Adams as well here on the other side. Let's take a quick break, but of course we've got to tell you about our friends over at Home Field Apparel. You can shop Home Field Apparel at homefieldapparel.com using the promo code PAY24, 15% off your first order. I've got the this one. I call this the baseball script.
Yes, yeah, I did that.
So baseball season is sneakily coming up. We're talking in like 2 weeks. They start playing in early February.
We got to get Fitz on the show.
Yes. We do need to get him on. They won't be playing in Kansas, obviously, because it is Super Bowl, but they will be playing relatively soon. So you can get something like this, a little bit of the sort of the classic cursive script Jayhawks. You can get any 40 plus other items over at homefieldapparel.com using the promo code PAY24. And we're back with more KU basketball talk in just a moment. Looking for tickets for your next event? Tickets for Less is your number one source. Save big on every purchase when you use promo code KCSN at ticketsforless.com. This is the Paid Podcast on the Kansas City Sports Network. I'm Nick Springer, here with Kevin Flaherty. We're brought to you by Emprise Bank, your partner in all things possible. Member FDIC. If you are listening on audio, be sure to subscribe on Apple, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. If you're joining us on YouTube, be sure to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. We're 500 subscribers now, so thanks so much to everybody that already has done that. You can drop a comment to share your thoughts. We had a very lively YouTube live chat during our show after the Houston game on Saturday, so you can join in there. You can join in after the fact, of course, anytime. But drop a comment, share what you're thinking. Maybe even if it's not about KU, what'd you have for breakfast? What'd you New Year's resolutions? I don't know, anything to get the conversation going here on our channel. So thanks so much to everybody that supports and does that as well. To continue this conversation around KU basketball, I wanted to touch on Dajuan Harris. We kind of glossed over a little bit. No Dajuan Harris in the game, Kevin, and it was very obvious what KU was missing without Dajuan Harris. There was some questionable turnovers. There was some struggling with just sort of getting the offense going, it felt like, especially with, Zeke Mayo has been so good this season, but as the primary ball handler, I felt like he was a little uncomfortable, which kind of slowed some things down, disrupted some things for Kansas. But it's obvious that Dajuan Harris is a floor general when he's out there. And without him, Kansas, obviously put up 91 points and all that stuff. But still at times you could see they were clearly missing someone to sort of hold things together offensively. And then obviously defensively, it was clear that they missed on his defense as well.
Yeah, in Orlando, UCF turned the ball over on about 18% of their possessions against Kansas at Allen Fieldhouse. where you would think it would be higher, it was 9%. So turnover rate was halved. Even beyond that, you take out like turnovers on defense. UCF got into its offense way too easily. I thought at times, and Kansas didn't do enough to. I don't want to say dissuade, but just kind of knock UCF off what it wanted to do. And it was kind of funny. KJ Adams wound up playing a major role, and I'm sure we'll talk about it late on Keyshawn Hall, who was just nuclear hot. But also, like, Kansas didn't have the ball pressure, the different things necessary to make it to where they couldn't get the ball to Keyshawn Hall, right? Like, when UCF wanted to get the ball to Keyshawn Hall, it was not that hard for them to get the ball to Keyshawn Hall for the most part. And so I think you really saw defensively, offensively, Kansas was getting good shots at times, but kind of from, I don't want to say unorthodox places, but that big-to-big passing game has really come a long way in a short amount of time. You looked at the turnovers that Zeke Mayo had, kind of trying to facilitate things. They had a couple sloppy turnovers, and I thought it was interesting, to your point on Shaq Moore, starts the second half, plays a couple minutes. We don't see him again. He just goes out and Diggy Coit was the guy for most of that. I guess we did see Shaq Moore like at the very end when you're fouling and defending, like for the last 3 seconds. But
yeah, I think he did come in like literally the last 20 seconds or whatever.
Yeah. But that was it for the most part. Kansas handed it over to Diggy Coit, which I think a lot of people would have said that's crazy, but before that point. But Diggy played well. I thought he had some nice moments. He shot the ball well. It's nice to see him. He had a shooting slump for a while. It seems like he's breaking out of that a little bit. Defensively, I thought too, he wasn't as effective as Dajuan, and he's not going to be with his size, but you did see the effort there and the way that he competed on that end. But yeah, it was definitely a day that you felt like if you had Dajuan Harris, KU might have scored 100 in this thing while holding UCF's offense, significantly below where it was. You maybe couldn't have picked a better game to see Dajuan Harris's value.
Yeah, I think the key thing with Dajuan, the key word that I kept thinking about while watching the game was he stabilizes things, right?
Yep.
On both ends of the floor. He's a stabilizer. He is somebody that, when the boat's rocking, when things are hectic, he's the guy that can settle you down on offense and get you into, some sets, and on defense can really set the tone as well. So that's kind of what I kept, that's kind of the term that I kept falling back on is like, man, I'm watching this game and it's just chaos. It's just bodies flying everywhere. The ball's going everywhere. Crazy things are happening. And it's like, man, if only there was one guy that could be in the game that could just sort of settle everything down, stabilize for a little bit. And that, I think, was what was really missing from the game from KU's perspective, was just somebody that could sort of reset things a little bit when KU was getting into some choppy waters really on both ends of the floor. So that's kind of what I kept feeling. That's the sense that I kept getting with Dajuan Harris. On the Diggy Coit subject, Bill Self spoke glowingly of him after the game. It's clear that Bill Self, values what he brings and values his mentality, his toughness, like he said. Even for a guy of his size, like, it's obvious that he fights, and he's the guy that you're going to get a lot of energy from and a lot of effort from. And obviously we know that Bill Self really values those types of things, and I think to a certain extent, Bill Self also, he probably more so than maybe the outside viewer trusted that Diggy Coit was going to break out of his slump, like you said. Yeah. And that's why he kept going to him. That's why he kept, putting him in, saying, hey, I think this guy is going to break out. And he did actually. He did eventually, hit some nice shots in the game last night for KU against UCF, which was great to see. I do want to touch on KJ Adams as well.
Yes.
I want to touch on a couple things. I'm going to start here with this. The last 20 seconds of the game was the perfect microcosm of KJ Adams as a player, of KJ Adams this season, and of KJ Adams probably in his entire career. Let's break it down here. There's 40 seconds left. You're up 2. Or no, you're up 1. It's 87-86. 40 seconds left, you're up 1. Kansas has the ball. They get into their offensive set. The clock is running down. You need to get a bucket to try to at least make it to where, hey, a 3, and they can force overtime, which overtime probably sounded a lot more scary last night than it maybe would have otherwise, considering the circumstances after what we saw against Houston. But still, you can, if you get a 2 here, or you're in good shape. Shot clock's running down. Ball ends up in the hands of KJ Adams. He clanks, and I mean clanks, a layup, right? And you're thinking, oh my gosh, again, really. Then he sprints down the floor and ends up getting the turnover at the other end of UCF as they were trying to drive in to possibly take the lead with 4 seconds left. Gets fouled. You're thinking, oh, KJ Adams, a guy who's sub 70, even sub 60% at times from the free throw line in his career, going to the line to try to, again, put KU hopefully up 3, best case. And what does he do? He hits both free throws.
Yep.
That, to me, is the perfect sort of almost poetic justice of KJ Adams as a player, where, look, he's not perfect, obviously. There are things where he really, he's limited, right? You saw that with the missed shot on the offensive end. But to sprint down, to then force the turnover, get the ball back, and then when you needed him most, 2 clutch free throws. That, to me, was the perfect sort of encapsulation of KJ Adams, of a flawed player who has poured his heart and soul into this Kansas program for 4 years, done absolutely, 4 years, has done absolutely everything that's ever been asked of him to his absolute best that he can do. And yes, there's ups and downs with what he does, but in the end, his heart and soul, his effort, it comes through with a big play to force the turnover, and then he still is able to step up to the free throw line and make 2 free throws. I don't know. It really did just sort of come full circle for me at that moment. Like, man, for whatever people think of KJ Adams, what his role should be, like, he is a player who, despite his flaws, despite what he struggles with, he's giving maximum effort every single second that he's in the game. And he's pouring everything he has into this Kansas program. And for what he's gone through personally, right, with what he experienced with his mother, unfortunately, it's still sad to me that I think people will so negatively attack him. Like, obviously he has a role. We talked about it, but to see what that was at the end of the game, kind of brought it home. Like, hey, look, even though this guy has the issues, the flaws, he is maybe the truest of true Jayhawks that Kansas has had in the past 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Like, we're talking in the last decade, maybe. And that's the part that resonated with me the most in watching him, step to the line and hit those free throws to help put the game away.
Well, and if you remember fairly late, I don't remember exactly at what minute, he had like an offensive rebound, like scramble play that led to a big 3. He was the guy that at the end of the game, Keyshawn Hall, again, was just nuclear hot, wound up with 34 points. And, Flory Badunga is a terrific defender. I think a guy who's got savvy as a scorer at the 4 spot, like Keyshawn Hall, who's really more of a big wing than he is a 4.
Yeah.
It can give Flory issues. Like, he understood, how to use his body, change a pace, how to move off the ball to put Flory into tough spots. And it showed the trust level that Bill Self basically said, hey, KJ, go cool this guy off at the very end. Like, if you stop Keyshawn Hall from scoring, KU's probably going to win that game. And that's pretty much what happened. On the last couple possessions, they got the ball to Keyshawn Hall. They tried to ISO him against KJ Adams, and he didn't score.
It didn't work.
KJ locked him up. And so that's the thing. Like, I get there should be more nuance than there is to this, right? Like, there's a world of difference between KJ needs to play 35 minutes and KJ should never be playing type of deal. KJ Adams has a role that he can be terrific at. And I think actually last night was maybe a lot closer to that role, because he was, you hate to say playing limited minutes because he wound up, playing more than that. Yes, in quotation marks. But even so, he wasn't playing, 30 plus minutes, right? He What was he wound up at 26. I like him more at 20 to 25, coming off the bench the way that he did, impacting the game with his energy. He winds up with an efficient 12 points. I know Self, kind of joke around that he was rusty, missed a couple shots. He was 3 for 6. Like he shot 50%, was good from the free throw line. You were talking about the free throw shooting, Nick. I realize it's small sample size, but on the year, he's up to almost 80% as a free throw shooter. And so impacting the game with his energy, kind of getting, those energy points, getting to the free throw line, and then being the defensive guy that he is, that's worth 20 to 25 minutes a game. And that's a role where he can impact games like this and really impact winning at an outsized level. I think where things can get into trouble is when he's out there maybe a little bit too much. Other teams are really able to game plan for him. They're able to game plan against your offense with, some of the spacing concerns and things like that. The other thing that KJ does that he doesn't get enough credit for is he's a really good passer. And there were a couple times last night where he created opportunities with his passing on the offensive end. But I thought last night was sort of the quintessential KJ game in terms of, like you said, it wasn't that he was perfect, but it was he fit in, in an area and played in a way that he was going to help Kansas win that game. I do think, Nick, I don't know that any of us would love to see the 3 big lineups,
Yeah.
as much as we saw them last night. And I think, that was a lot of that was due to being down a guard and whatever else. But I do think that there is a spot for KJ to play 20 minutes a game and have Flaherty play more in that 28 to 30 type minutes a game that really helps this team kind of take off a little bit.
Well, and I'll say this, and you can maybe correct me if you think I'm wrong here. I also get the sense now, and I started thinking about this more, like the amount of minutes that KJ Adams is playing each game, it is not determined by KJ Adams at this point.
For sure.
It's determined by Rylan Griffin, AJ Storr, Flory. Like it's not about what KJ Adams is doing or not doing, because we know what we're going to get with him, I think. It's really about the other guys. It's about whether or not Bill Self is going to have more trust in a Flory, which I think he probably does now based off of what we've seen from Flory in the past, handful of games. But it's whether or not he does trust in Rylan Griffin or AJ. Like, that's why we're seeing the 3 big lineup, right? Like, we're seeing the 3 big lineup because Bill Self doesn't think he can go to AJ Storr at the 3 or Rylan Griffin at the 3 with those types of lineups. That's why we're seeing KJ Adams. So I don't think it's as much about KJ Adams. What I mean by that is, like, it's KJ Adams, however he plays, is not determining his minutes. It's kind of the other guys that Bill has, that if he trusts them more, which I think can be really frustrating, because I think from an outside perspective, why wouldn't you trust Rylan Griffin, especially after the game he just had against Houston? AJ Storr is a bit more of a tricky situation with what he's done or not done to this point. And Bill Self trusts KJ Adams. And I mean, look, there's a reason why we talk about the Bill Self circle of trust, because if you are in it and you have his full trust, then you are going to be the guy that he calls upon in situations when he feels like he needs somebody he can trust, or when he needs somebody that he knows what he's going to get when he puts them on the floor, right? I mean, can you blame him with the AJ Storr situation? Like, you don't know what you're going to get with AJ Storr at this point. No matter, you throw him on the floor 10 different times, you might get 10 different outcomes.
Well, and I thought AJ did some good things last night, and us on this show, I mean, if AJ's struggling, we'll say it. but I thought AJ did some good things last night. I will say, I do think Griffin is getting into that circle of trust too. I think he played the last 15 minutes of the game.
Yeah, he didn't. He made the
48 mark, and that was kind of, I don't want to say was that the end of the 3 big lineups? Yeah, with the exception when they did the inbound. So yeah, I mean, Self did wind up going to, Griffin being out there for the last however long. So I do think that Griffin is emerging as, a person in that spot, and that's good to see. But yeah, to your point, I obviously everybody knows I covered Texas. It feels like we talk about it fairly often. But I remember specifically when I covered Texas football, there was a player who played a lot who would just get killed on the message boards, right? And I didn't really think a lot about it. I mean, the player was struggling, but he was out there a ton, and fans really had an issue with it. And I wound up running into the player's dad, I think, at some event, and was talking to him a little bit. And he was, dad was a football coach, and he goes, the unfortunate thing about it is, he goes, I know that my son, is struggling out there, but he's like, he's out there because they don't have a better alternative. So like, it's not, it's not necessarily his fault that he's playing this many snaps. It's the fact that they don't have somebody to take snaps from him. And to your point, I hate to almost put it that way because it makes it seem like KJ is not very good, but like we said, there's a big difference between KJ having to play 35 minutes because Bill Self does not trust anybody else. There's not somebody else that he feels comfortable with, versus Bill Self being like, you know what, KJ is an important part of our team, but we have other people that we can utilize here. I do think it's good that Ryland Griffin played so much. He did have some good things in there as well. It had the nice little drive, where he kind of, it wasn't really a Euro step, but it was kind of like a Luka, like, slow down type thing to get to it was hard to explain, but I do think Ryland Griffin's emergence is starting to help there. When you get Dajuan healthy, maybe KJ does slide into more of a 20 to 25 minute a game type role, and that might be the best fit for everybody. Remember, we talked about the 2020 team and how David McCormick started that whole bunch of games, and then McCormick got suspended because of the K-State brawl, and Self was forced to look into other lineups. He kind of found something he liked with Isaiah Moss out there, and you wound up McCormick didn't really, become a long-term starter after that. He started coming off the bench. That team really found its stride because of the spacing and the different things that it brought. KJ's shoulder injury, could that be sort of the equivalent of the McCormick thing, where now KJ, not that he's not going to play a big role, because McCormick played a big role on that team still. It was just a different role that kind of opened up because Self had to look at other things. And so I am interested to see 5 games from now, are we still saying, hey, Flory's the starting 4, KJ's energy guy off the bench, or is it the sort of thing where KJ's right back to where he was before and he's playing 33 minutes a game and starting everything? I think that will be an interesting thing to watch.
One other note I would like to point out with this is, assuming KJ becomes fully healthy again, if he is re-entered into the starting lineup and you see Flory off the bench, I would just urge a little bit of caution, or urge a little bit of pause there, on the sense of freaking out about who's starting. I mean, Bill Self always says, he says it literally every year, probably multiple times per year, it doesn't matter who starts, it matters who finishes. And that's where you see with Ryland Griffin playing late in the game against UCF, that's a good sign. So I would not overreact to KJ Adams possibly being back in the starting lineup if that does end up happening. I'm not saying it will or whatever. We'll have to see what happens, but I would just not I would urge not overreacting to that in a strong negative way, because he could end up going back into the starting lineup with Flory off the bench, but the minutes distribution is still 20 and 25, right? Or, 26 and 30, whatever it may be, really.
Yeah.
So I would just keep that in mind. But all in all, Kansas ends up getting the win at home at Allen Fieldhouse. They survive without Dajuan Harris. By the way, Dajuan Harris' status for the game against Baylor coming up on Saturday. As of last night, post-game, Bill Self didn't sound overly confident. He just said it was kind of a play-it-by-ear type situation. He mentioned how they were under the impression on Monday that Dajuan Harris was going to be able to play, actually, last night. And then basically he got out, on Tuesday, yesterday, before the game, and was not really able to do anything. And that ultimately held him out. And, ankle injuries, if that's what it is, can be a bit fickle, right? Some days you feel pretty good on it. Other days, if it's swollen or whatever it may be, maybe you don't feel as good. But that could be a big loss if he's not able to play against Baylor on Saturday, because you're going to be on the road, obviously, number one. And so no Dajuan Harris on the road, based off of what we saw, no Dajuan Harris at home, really alarms me. So I would be concerned if that's the case. And this is a Baylor team that they are analytically they still get a lot of respect. They're 13-7. They just lost in overtime against BYU on the road. They have kind of some weird losses, I guess, sort of in conference play, especially, right? They lose to TCU at home. That was the first game where Jamie Roach, I believe, got hurt, right? He got a concussion in that game. His status still kind of unclear. Then they lost against Arizona the game before that. They lost by 20 against Iowa State on the road, but they also have some nice wins. They beat Utah by 15, who's not one of the better teams in the conference, but this is a team that it's a pretty standard Scott Drew team, which is a ton of guards, very explosive, can score a lot of points. Defense is questionable at times. What do you make of Kansas going on the road against Baylor here? This is also a big game for me for Kansas because your next two are against Iowa State and Kansas State. Two tough games. Iowa State at home and then K-State on the road is going to be a tough game, I think, just from the rivalry standpoint. That's the only game K-State cares about. But what do you make of this game against Baylor coming up on Saturday, and how KU could find a way to get a win in Waco?
Yeah, I think if you watch the BYU game at all, I think BYU shot almost 65% from two. So if you're Kansas, that's something that you have circled like 5 exclamation points. This is a game that you really want Hunter Dickinson to kind of take off. And credit to Hunter Dickinson, he didn't shoot the ball well last night, but he got to the free throw line. There have been games this year, a lot of them, it feels like, where KU didn't get to the free throw line 12 times as a team. Hunter Dickinson got to the line 12 times by himself last night. And so I think that's going to be a big key. This isn't a super deep Baylor team, Nick, and so you look at it from that standpoint, you really want to have Dajuan because, whether it's Jeremy Roach or Rob Wright, both of those guys kind of stir the drink and can score. And so you really want your point guard defense to be there. I'm not sure how Kansas is going to deal with BJ Edgecombe, with how dynamic it, if you haven't seen it, he's one of the most explosive athletes in the Big 12. He's also 6'5". So, putting a guy who's really quick like Shaq Moore on him, it would be interesting to see how that matchup goes. I'm not sure, Zeke Mayo has the foot quickness there defensively. But to your point, I think Baylor can be got on the other end. And so if you can get some stops, cleaning the glass is going to be important because Norshad Omier, from that 4 spot really rebounds well, can be a force on the offensive glass as well. And so if you get a stop, make it a stop, right? Like don't give up multiple shots. And Kansas was terrific on the offensive glass against UCF. And so if you can continue to stack up possessions that way, that's going to be a big key in this one. Can I just say one other thing too, Nick? Flory has gotten so old hat at this point that we just glossed over Flory having a double-double with 5 blocks, 2 steals, and that's the crazy thing about he's grown so quickly that it's almost staggering that he has 10 points. I think he finished with 11 rebounds, 2 assists, 5 blocks, 2 steals. And, he wasn't one of the 5 biggest talking points. It was oh yeah, Flory's good. Flory's good. Flory did a nice job. The other thing, and the thing that reminds me quite a bit of Joel Embiid is Joel Embiid's learning curve was so quick, right? He'd be bad at something, and then 3 games later, he'd all of a sudden be really good at it. And, one of the funny things is we did talk about the big-to-big passing. Flory had 2 assists total through the first 16 games.
Jeez.
And he has 2 assists in 3 of the last 4 games. So, he went from a total non-passer, hey, if this ball touches Flory's hands, you're probably never seeing it again, to, a major point of KU's offense. And so Flory's growth has been so quick, and I think he's another guy that's going to be really key kind of in this Baylor game in terms of is he able to battle, Omer and make an impact on the glass again? Is he able to get some points on the interior? Because Omer is, he's really broad. He's like 240, 245 pounds, good athlete. He's also 6'7". And so, Floria is going to have the length advantage there probably, and, have a chance to potentially do some things on the interior on the other end with his quickness. And so Floria, I think, will be a key guy to watch in this one as well. But if we haven't gotten to the predictions segment, but I think the two post guys, like how they play in this one, obviously Dajuan Harris is like the big like question mark, but how the two post guys play in this one could tell a lot in terms of whether KU sneaks out of Waco with a road win or not.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up Joel Embiid, because with the development we've seen of Flory in literally 3 weeks, it does remind you a lot of him, right? Like, just stepping up and becoming so much better, so fast, right? I mean, Bill Self has talked about how with Joel Embiid in December, he was benching him.
Yeah.
Right. And then 2 weeks later in January, he's like doing incredible things, right? So Flory, I think, is sort of on that same trajectory, which is very, very exciting to see. And I think that probably feeds into the frustration with the KJ Adams conversation that we had earlier, where it's like, hey, you've got this guy that it has, the learning curve on him has been so dramatic, and he's clearly improved significantly. It's even just since conference play started, and you want to get him on the floor. So, and yeah, I think this is a game where you might see more of him, because Norchad Omier, like you said, he's essentially a little bit of like KJ Adams, right? This very, very incredibly athletic, explosive player is going to give you a ton of energy, who maybe just lacks a little bit of height for his position, kind of the same way. So, with KJ Adams and Omier, they may cancel each other out, but with Flory, you may have a bit of an edge there. And then certainly you mentioned it, like, you've got two teams coming to this game, Kevin, that the status of their starting point guards for both teams is a bit up in the air.
Yeah.
So that's probably, to me, the biggest storyline of the game heading into it. If you're Baylor, you mentioned VJ Edgecombe, who's going to be very difficult to slow down or stop, because you think about, Rylan Griffin probably makes the most sense to try to put on him, I guess, but we'll see. We'll see. I don't know.
The main guy who stops VJ Edgecombe is VJ Edgecombe, and I'm not saying that in a negative way. No, I'm not saying that in a negative way. So
you know what you mean, though.
Yeah, like there are guys out there that you look at and you say, well, this guy's either going to shoot you into a game or out of a game. And I'm not saying that about Edgecombe. What I'm saying is that when Edgecombe makes up his mind that, hey, I'm going to be really good tonight, there's not really a whole lot you can do about it. That's the reason he's a projected top 5 pick, and the reason that you'll look up sometimes and he'll have 28. You're just like, oh my God, like that was crazy.
Yeah, so you just hope that he doesn't totally take things over. If you're KU, and again, look, we saw it with Hall last night for UCF. Maybe it's a situation where Bill Self tells KJ Adams to go cool off Edgecombe. I don't know. I'm just throwing it out there. I mean, who knows? We'll see how things play out on Saturday. But yeah, well, let's get into some game predictions here. Chances on the road in Waco against Baylor. Both teams with their point guards questionable at this point. It's a 50-50 game if you look at it on KenPom. Literally, KenPom has it as a coin flip, 50-50. What do you think will happen? How do you think this one plays out?
Yeah, I think, one of the interesting things about this one is I think Hunter Dickinson has a chance to have a really big game. And when we always make a player to pick, and I would pick Hunter in this one, because I think if he has a game where he's, 5 for 13 or something like that, it's maybe going to be tough to win this one. But if he has one where he's 10 for 15 or getting to the free throw line a whole bunch, not only is his scoring going to be important, because I do think that these two teams are probably going to score on each other, but I think the other part, Nick, is Baylor, as we said before, isn't a super deep team. When Josh Ojianwuna leaves the court, Omer is their center at 6'7", 240. And so if you can get Ojianwuna into foul trouble and have it to where, hey, Hunter is out there against a guy who is 7 inches shorter than he is, you're feeling pretty good about that matchup. And so I think his aggressiveness in this one is going to go a long way in terms of if he's aggressive offensively and really, posting into contact and getting the ball deep in his post ups and giving himself a chance not just to get buckets, but to potentially pile up fouls as well. I think Hunter Dickinson is the guy that gives KU its best chance. I do think I know people are mad because of the Houston game, and I know people are mad because the UCF game was chaotic against a team that you absolutely lit up on the road. I actually kind of think they're trending in the right direction, though, Nick. Like, I think if you have a healthy Dajuan Harris, I think they're finding the formula that works a little bit. And I think this is going to be the game that kind of informs people to that if you don't feel that way. I think Kansas is going to win this game. I'll say that it won't be by much. I think they'll probably win by like 77-75 or something in that range. But I do think they come out with a really big road win, and it'll be interesting too, Nick, because you hate to look 2 games ahead, especially when this game is at Baylor, but big Monday coming up where you have Iowa State coming in. You have a chance, not necessarily like, oh my gosh, it's oh my gosh, this team is incredible, but you do have a chance to really alter the narrative on this team if you're able to go 2-0 in those games. If you find a way to sneak out this win against Baylor, you come home, defeat Iowa State in what should be a wild game at Allen Fieldhouse, all of a sudden the confidence level with this team is rising. The narrative level on this team is rising in terms of, hey, this is a team that, all of a sudden looks like they have a very real chance. Things could change in a real hurry, but it all starts with Saturday's game. If you lose at Waco, all of a sudden you're potentially in a spot where the shoe could be on the other foot, where if you lose at Waco and then lose to Iowa State, it's like, well, you lost at home to Houston, you barely beat UCF, you lost to Baylor, you lost to Iowa State. Where's this team going? Are they, really going in the right direction? But I do think that right now, I feel like they're starting to figure some things out, and I think that that'll come due against Baylor on Saturday. How about you?
I'll go player to watch first.
Yeah.
My player to watch, I'm going to go with Zeke Mayo
All
for
right.
a couple different reasons. Number one, like we mentioned, if Dajuan Harris is in any way hobbled, or even if he's not able to play at all, or even if he is playing, if he's not able to play as much as he would, I'm looking at Zeke Mayo. You're on the road. You're probably going to be a guy that's going to be handling the ball a little bit more in that scenario. You got to take care of it. And then beyond that, from the scoring standpoint, Zeke Mayo has struggled on the road. We've highlighted it a couple times on the show. Like, his confidence level is just not the same on the road as it is at Allen Fieldhouse. And this could be a game where he needs to be that yin to Hunter Dickinson's yang, right? In terms of scoring, he needs to be that guy. I mean, we saw it against UCF. They both go for 24 points, right? Like, I think this could be a game where even if Hunter Dickinson is effective in scoring a lot, if he doesn't have that supplementary outside score, which at this point it has to be Zeke Mayo essentially, then maybe that might not be enough. So I think Zeke Mayo is the guy that I'll keep an eye on because if he needs to handle the ball more, it needs to be more of a guy who's facilitating the offense. If Dajuan Harris is unable to go or is slowed down at all, that's going to be very critical based off what we saw against UCF, handling the ball more. But then B, I think he needs to be that confident scorer again, especially because I think to your point, Baylor's probably going to get theirs, I would say, right? Like, I think VJ Edgecombe is probably going to get his. They're probably going to be able to score a little bit. So I think it's going to be critical that Zeke Mayo is able to score as well in the game. So he's the guy that I'm going to keep an eye on for those reasons, with possibly no Dajuan Harris, and then on top of that, being the supplementary perimeter scorer to Hunter Dickinson inside. So I'm going to go with Kansas. I can't say that I feel super confident about it. Ken Pom has it 50-50. Nick Pom probably has it. Yeah, maybe a little bit the same. We'll see. I don't know. But I'm going to go with Kansas as well. I'm going to go 75-71 Kansas. I think it'll be a close game as well. And it'll probably come down to some late stops. I mean, you look at the UCF game, really, Kevin, that game boils down to getting a stop up one with 10 seconds left with UCF driving to try to score, right?
Yeah.
I think you could run into something similar with Baylor, where regardless of how KU's defense has been throughout the game, it may come down to one stop late in the game that could determine it. And I think he will get it done. And like you said, regardless of the outcome, it's a quick turnaround for Iowa State on Monday night. So the game's going to be very telling because, looking a little bit further ahead on the schedule, after Iowa State, then you have that gap until Saturday against K-State. But then look, you go play Colorado, who's 100 in KenPom, Utah, who's 87, BYU, who's 31 right now, but then Oklahoma State, who's 108, and Colorado again, who's 100. So you're going to have a span of 5 games with basically 4 of them being against the bottom tier teams in the conference. So if you can get through this next week and a half, where, I mean, let's say best case you go 3-0, right, against Baylor, Iowa State, and K-State, you're setting yourself up then to ideally have a pretty comfortable stretch where you'll be able to stack some wins pretty easily in theory. But on the other side, like you mentioned, if the other shoe drops and you go 1-2 in these next 3 games, right? Maybe you lose to Baylor and lose to Iowa State, or lose to Baylor and lose to K-State, or beat Baylor but then lose to Iowa State and K-State, whatever combination. If you just go 1-2 over the next 3 games, that outlook looks a lot more dreary for your chances. And at this point, like, I don't want to say the Big 12 title is totally out of reach, but you're 3 games back, right? Still of Houston.
Yeah.
So it's going to be tough regardless. But at this point, you're looking beyond that and saying, hey, look, the NCAA tournament's going to be in Wichita and for the first 2 rounds. And if you're Kansas and you're a 2 seed, you're probably going to get that region, I would think. And that would be huge for getting fans to, getting the support of KU fans in a city close by. So there's a lot more, to it beyond that. But I think if you ask myself right now, he's probably saying, what NCAA tournament? Let's just win the next game, which, yes, I agree with that also. So we'll see how things play out on Saturday. Kansas is at Baylor in Waco. We'll probably have some instant reaction to it on Saturday or Sunday ahead of the Iowa State game. Talk more about the Iowa State game as well on Big Monday. So, Kevin, you got anything else for the listeners here?
No, I don't think so. One other guy that I would watch on this one, typically when KU's had an advantage at center, whether it was Azubuike or whoever, Baylor would send double teams, whether it was at the catch or on the bounce. Keep an eye on a guy like Rylan Griffin, because the ball might find him, on some of these things where either Flory or Hunter have guys spilling over on him. A kick out or 2 might find them for open looks, and you make a couple of those, it can go a long way to deciding whether or not you win this game.
He's Kevin Flaherty. I'm Nick Springer. This is the Payee Podcast. Be sure to subscribe. Give us a like. Give us a comment, whether you're on YouTube or on our audio side, wherever it is. Subscribe to the channel. Join the conversation and plenty more. And we're going to talk to you again soon after that KU Baylor game. So until then, we'll talk to you again soon. See ya.